1 to 2 glasses of fluoridated tap water, the FDA would require on every tap in every house, in every town that's fluoridated, only use 1 or 2 glasses of this water, and if your child accidentally swallows more than 2 glasses of water, contact a poison center. Utterly extraordinary. I mean, so much of this rings like a book by Kafka, or possibly Alice in Wonderland, or even a show episode of Monty Python. Incidentally, as far as this warning is concerned, the US Poison Control Center has reported over 24,000 exposures to toothpaste that people reported in. Most countries don't do this, but their kids' teeth are as good as those that do. So it's really an experimental program. Both the York Review and the advisory panel, people like Trevor Sheldon, and the US National Research Council report, and particularly its chairman, have made it very clear that even after 60 years, there are many studies that have not been done on health. Many key issues have not been resolved, which therefore, if you continue on that basis, then you're doing something which is experimental. The only certainty in this, the only certainty about the safety and effectiveness of fluoridation has been in the eye of those promoting the practice. It's not in the scientific literature. It's still an experimental program. And that, therefore, means it's a direct violation of the Nuremberg Code, which requires informed consent to any medical experiments carried out on human beings. Now, I know that sounds as pretty emotive. I do not want to sound that emotive. I don't want you to think that I'm saying that the dentists who promote this are a bunch of Nazis. I'm not saying that. I think most dentists who promote this are decent people, and they have, by and large, taken at face value what they've been told by their professional bodies and often by their governments at face value. They don't have time to read the literature. And so it's more a crime of ignorance than it is a crime of volition. But that is the shocker. If you actually look at this, it's experimental. We don't know answers to key questions, and yet we're doing this to people without their consent, and in the case of low-income families, without their ability to avoid it if they don't want it. Most countries have rejected the experiment. Only 8 countries have more than 50% of their population drinking fluoridated water: Australia, Colombia, Ireland, Israel, Malaysia, New Zealand, Singapore, and the United States, of course. 98% of Western Europe drinks non-fluoridated water. 4 countries have fluoride in their salt, which does give a modest amount of choice in the matter. But if you look at the tooth decay in these 16 countries here, 12 of them are unfluoridated and 4 of them are fluoridated. And these lines represent tooth decay in 12-year-olds. And you can see that from the 1960s to the present, that tooth decay has been coming down in all these countries, regardless of whether they've been fluoridated or non-fluoridated. And it's impossible, I think, for anybody to make a distinction between the 4 countries which are fluoridated from the 12 that are not fluoridated on that graph. And Dr. Cheng, Sheldon, and Chalmers said essentially the same thing in the British Medical Journal. So the evidence that fluoridation is ineffective. This is the shocker for us when we really looked at the nitty-gritty of the scientific detail. The shock was to discover how weak the evidence is of fluoridation's effectiveness. And quite frankly, if you can't demonstrate that fluoridation is really effective, strongly effective, then you don't have to prove many health effects to say this is nonsense. If it doesn't work, why should we have any risks at all, remote, small, large, or what have you, if you can't demonstrate that it is effective? And I think there are many people out there whose attitude is to fluoridation. One, you shouldn't force it upon me in my drinking water. That's, I think, the most common and the most solid argument. 2, I'm worried about possible health effects because you haven't done all the studies you should have done. And 3, but then accepting the third one, that it's effective. And those people say, well, accept it's effective, because they all say it's effective, but I don't want it because I don't want people to force it on me, even if it's effective. And I don't want it if there's any inkling of a health problem for my children, my grandchildren. But have accepted that it's okay, that it works. And now I want to show you the startling evidence that it doesn't. And then we'll have questions after this section. So if we compare countries, if we compare US states, if we compare New York State counties, if we look at the historical trends in New Zealand, or taking the first three, in these large surveys, you cannot see a difference in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated entities. So the first one we've just done, haven't we? There's no difference in the drop in tooth decay between fluoridated and non-fluoridated countries. And if you look at it today, it's a complete wash. Comparing US states. Here are the states in order, the US states in order of the percentage of their populations drinking fluoridated water. And so if we had any indication of tooth decay, we would expect the worst tooth decay to be over here with very little fluoridation, and the best teeth to be over here with 100% fluoridation, and everything else somewhere in between. We would expect to see curves that would follow that curve if the theory held. Well, they asked the question in low-income families, are your children's teeth good, very good, or excellent? And these are the positive responses from low-income families, 50 different surveys in 50 different states. And you can see it's essentially flat. There's a lot of noise here, but it's flat. You don't see any trend here that matches that rise in percentage of the population drinking fluoridated water. They did it for high-income families, and it's even more striking. Averaging about over 80%, you can see that very little noise, very flat. Now, you don't see any relationship whatsoever to the percentage of the state drinking fluoridated water, but what you do see is a very clear distinction between having tooth decay in low-income versus high-income families. And that's the issue. That will dwarf any other factor. So if you do a study of tooth decay and you don't very tightly control for income levels amongst many other issues, but that in particular, you can get any result that you want. And that's part of the reason why people that promote fluoridation are constantly comparing one town with another town. Because if you select just one town, compare it with another town, as I say, you can get any result that you want if you don't tightly control for, let's say it, if you don't tightly control for income levels, if you don't tightly control for other minerals in the drinking water, if you don't tightly control for dental interventions, what the quality of the dental services in the two towns. And finally, here's a surpriser, if you don't control for annual sunshine levels, because it turns out that sunshine influences the production of vitamin D, and vitamin D has a lot to say about tooth decay, the quality of the mineral of the teeth. So there are many variables that have never been controlled. Okay, comparing New York State counties. Now, New York State looked at the average tooth decay in third graders throughout New York State. So all those blue dots are the tooth decay by county. And the highest tooth decay is up there, and the lowest tooth decay is down here. And we have on this bottom curve, across there, have put the counties with no fluoridation, that's 0%, and the counties over here with 100% here, and those in between. And again, if there was a relationship between the percentage fluoridation and tooth decay, you'd expect all the points with no tooth decay to be up here, and all the points with 100% fluoridation would be down here, and you'll get a curve that went like that. We get one which is flat. If anything, it's going up. It's going in the wrong direction for that. This is what they call linear regression, and it's essentially the best mathematical fit of this data as far as the relationship between here and here. If these two are related, between the tooth decay and the percentage of fluoride in the water, of the people drinking fluoridated water, if there was a relationship, there would be a strong line going down. If it's flat, there is no relationship. That's what the statistical analysis says. However, if you plot the data a slightly different way, if you plot it against income levels, sure enough, you do get a line sloping downwards, which indicates that the high income families have lower tooth decay than the low income families. And if you plot the curves as I did before, the black line is the percentage of fluoridation by county, New York County. The blue line is the high income tooth decay. The red line is the low income. Again, you see the separation of those two curves. Again, you see that the linear regression is absolutely flat there for high income, and if anything, it's going up for low income. No relationship, none. Historical trends in New Zealand. John Cahoon plotted tooth decay in 5-year-olds in New Zealand, and the reason he was able to do that, in New Zealand, they actually look at tooth decay in every single child. So this isn't a survey, this isn't hand-picking what you want to look at, this is every kid, okay? And you see that tooth decay has been going down from the 1930s right the way down to the 1990s. He died in 1998. Now onto this curve, let's insert when fluoridation was introduced. And so this is the percentage of the population with fluoridation. It sort of plateaued out here. Now you don't see any change in the trajectory of this curve as a result of the introduction of fluoridation. And you can see when it is maximized, you still see that tooth decay continues to come down. So what this is telling us, there's something else which is reducing tooth decay in industrial countries. And it's not fluoridation, as much as the promoters would like you to believe it is fluoridation. Now, Chapter 7 deals with the early evidence. The key paper in promoting fluoridation was this paper done by Trenley Dean in 1942, where he looked at tooth decay in 21 towns, 21 cities. This is the famous 21 city study, and he plotted tooth decay against the fluoride concentration in the drinking water. And he said, look, tooth decay comes down and it seems to plateau out at about 1 part per million. And meanwhile, he says, dental fluorosis, that we'll be talking about later, dramatically increases above 1 part per million, and all of a sudden then 1 part per million became the optimal level, because you see that you don't get much of a benefit above 1 part per million, and you know above 1 part per million that dental fluorosis rates go up considerably. So 1 part per million was a balance, and essentially what they said was with adding fluoride we can reduce tooth decay and only give about 10% of the children dental fluorosis, but only in its very mild form. Only a dentist would notice this was going on. Okay, well, Rudolf Ziegelbecker studied this Dean's data very carefully, and he found that Dean was highly selective in the data that he used. He had data for far more than 21 cities. And the rationale he gave for choosing those 21 cities breaks down. He said he chose those 21 cities because they were the ones who had continuous knowledge of the water fluoride levels for over 20 years. And several of the cities he chose did not meet that criterion. But more importantly, he didn't control for mineral levels in the water, income levels, and all those other things. And what Ziegelbecker then did was to take every data point that he could and put it into a matrix. He got all the data from the United States and Europe, and he plotted it using a probit transformation, which I won't go into, against the logarithm of the fluoride concentration, and it's flat. Once again, it is flat. There is no relationship when you put all the data in. However, what is intriguing is if you do the same with dental fluorosis, which is known to be caused by fluoride, there you get a relationship. That the dental fluorosis figures do indeed, the prevalence of dental fluorosis do indeed increase as the level of fluoride goes up in a linear fashion. So one relationship is strong and rises above the noise, the other relationship, if it exists, is extremely weak and not sufficient to rise itself above the noise.